Train drivers of Reddit, what is the strangest thing you've seen on the tracks? I've been driving trains for about 10 years. The most memorable would be two male peacocks on the track doing some sort of a dominance display. Very pretty birds, but a shame to hit them. I'm guessing the train won that dominance display. Guy decided to commit suicide by standing the tracks, but he wanted his dog to go with him. The dog broke away. He would chase it down, drag it back onto the tracks as the train is bearing down. All horns plus lights going. People in the picnic area nearby are freaking out. Passengers leaning out windows seeing this weird scene repeated 3 or 4 times. Dog got away and survived. Guy did not. All passengers had to be debarked and bussed to next stop. FRAFTA really brings things to a halt when there's a human death. Debarked? Hell, at least the dog wasn't. We had a crew hit a homeless guy. They thought it was a trash bag in the middle of the night. Later at a hotel next town over, police came and arrested them. Like they had any control or even knew what happened. Seriously, they got arrested for that? That's ridiculous. They can't stop a train that fast. It was sort of the homeless guy's fault for falling asleep on the tracks. The conductors must have some kind of immunity from manslaughter charges due to the nature of the train. Not a conductor or my story, but it's a crazy one. I think it was askreddit that had one a couple of weeks ago asking crime scene cleanup crews about the worst thing they've ever seen, and someone commented and said they had to clean up a body that had committed suicide by train. They looked everywhere for the head and couldn't find it, so eventually they took the body to the morgue. The examiner happens to see a wisp of hair coming out of the chest and looks closer and see that the guy wasn't decapitated, but his head was shoved down into his body like he dove into the oncoming train. I've seen a lot of stuff in law enforcement, but that one got an audible what the fuck out of me. On scene looking after the train crew. After they have been taken home in a taxi, we had to move train to get the body out. I can confirm this as I've seen the police do the same thing looking for the head, and the cleanup guys found it's in his chest cavity. Dildos. Random, large dildos. They turn up at various parts of the network and achieve legendary status amongst the crew. Extra points if they can be seen by the passengers. You can gauge how long someone has been a driver by which dildos they remember. Alright, Bill. So you're saying that you have years of railroad experience, but have no proof? Yep. Okay, then. What's the largest dildo you've seen on the job? What the foo? Okay, you have no experience. Get out. Not a train driver but former Wendy's employee who needs to share my story. Closing up at 11 PM, co-worker goes out for smoke and comes back freaking out. There was a naked homeless guy laying in the middle of the track next to the store, jacking off and screaming like he was in pain. This track is often used as it runs straight through town. Anyone heard of Ottawa, Illinois? So many trains. So we called the cops and he was completely unresponsive to them. Still screaming and jerking it. Guy's completely paralyzed, all over, stiff as a board. They call paramedics and they put him on a stretcher. Still locked up, jacking and screaming. Turns out dude was like a human crack rock, and that's what he was. This surprised me until you mentioned Ottawa. That explains everything. The human unicorn of Chicago. It's a guy that would bend over next to the passing trains with a broomstick sticking out of his ass. Please tell me you have some sort of link you can post. I am not embarrassed to say I want to see this. Not a train driver, but someone once threw some cow tongues impaled with nails and pins on the tracks in my hometown. The bomb squad came out and everything, and it was a pretty big deal for our small town. Here's a news article about it. Why in the fuck did the fucking bomb squad come for that? I don't need sleep. I need answers. Like I said, small town with not a whole lot of action. I was stuck in traffic when the bomb squad was investigating the scene. And from what I heard, all they knew was that there was a strange package on the middle of the tracks. I guess they just took some extra precautions. There was a church with a preschool nearby too, so that may have had something to do with it. My husband is a train conductor and he said crackheads periodically like to get on the tracks next to this trailer park, and occasionally thief almost got hit. A couple years ago, a man parked his truck on the tracks and committed suicide. It was pretty sad. He was only 27 and had just lost custody of his kids in a divorce. My husband said the impact was so hard that it crushed his truck up pretty bad, but his head and torso were still intact, but there was blood and beer cans everywhere. Other than that, he's only ever seen a bunch of wildlife. I grew up in a railroad town in WNY. Suicide by train isn't very uncommon. You hear about at least one a year. One of them hit closer to home than normal. A guy that my dad sold land to drove down the hill in his Jeep into my backyard. He was extremely drunk and destroyed the front end of his Jeep. My dad told him to go home and he started crying that his wife left him. My dad still told him to just go home and get some rest. The guy didn't say anything about wanting to die, so my dad didn't say anything. I was home visiting that weekend. I live 5 hours from my parents. When I was getting ready to leave, I read the newspaper and it said that the guy who was in my parents' yard the other day committed suicide by train. According to a friend of mine whose dad is with the town police, deputy stepped out from his vehicle, walked out onto the tracks and waved at the train as it ran him over. It was super weird to me because you could still see his Jeep tracks in my parents' lawn from a few days before. Not me, but one of my colleagues had a double fatality. Couple having sex on the tracks. Only thing was, the coroner's report came out and the cause of death for the woman was not the train, and time of death was approximated as an hour before the incident. Jesus. That's enough Reddit for today. Gross. Witnessed a drunk chap grab the overhead lines once, melted his rib cage and his insides turned into goo. 25,000 volt will do that to you. That doesn't sound fun to watch. Quispy. Also, sorry that you had to see that. Not a train driver, but I work on the railway and have access to incident reports across the UK. I was reading this report live as it was submitted. A train driver saw someone on the track and hit this person. The driver got out to inspect and found no evidence he hit someone. There was no blood or damage to the train. They stopped the line to check the train in front and behind and still they found no evidence. No body was ever found. I was in the pub while reading this report, and it creeped the hell out of me. My partner used to work on the railway, mostly office based, so I've seen a few of these too. Some are rather grim and told me more than I could ever wish to know about various incidents. The winter before he retired, I read an incident where a driver reported a young boy about 5 years old wearing nothing but pajamas walking alongside the track on a rather steep embankment. This is made all the more unusual in that it was about 7 AM. Half light and the temperature was below zero. The driver contacted the signaller who cautioned all subsequent trains, including one that passed in the opposite direction only a couple of minutes later. All trains reported nobody and the network rail mom who walked the track also reported finding nobody nor any damage to the lineside fences. I read later on in a final update that there had been no missing persons reported to the local police either. For some reason this one felt very odd and still bothers me to this day. Not subway but London's Docklands Light Railway. They used to have a shutdown every August bank holiday. It gave 3 clear days where major works and repairs could be undertaken from the Saturday morning through to the Tuesday morning. We were putting new equipment trackside and on the Saturday morning we were walking along the track measuring distances etc. ready to do the install of equipment on the Sunday and Monday. As we were walking we noticed a woman laid across the tracks with her head on one rail and her feet on the other. Of note is that the DLR has a 500 volt DC third rail, which of course was off due to the shutdown. Also the trains are automatic and have no driver. Most of the time, we walked towards the woman, who had seen us but didn't do anything. When we were close we asked her what she was doing and told her she couldn't be here. It's illegal to trespass on the railway in the UK. They turned her head and said, "I've had enough. Next train coming is going to end it for me." I said, "Well, you're going to have to wait until Tuesday, love. There's no trains this weekend." She got up and stormed off complaining about bloody trains. Probably wrote a strongly worded letter. The only railway crossing in New Mexico where there's no signal reception of any kind. A Dunno truck randomly broke down on the track. We eventually got it moved but the train felt a little light when we started moving again. Turns out someone stole a bunch of chemicals from one of the tanker cars. Just so crazy. Who thinks of that? Did you hear that a kid went missing in that area? Yeah, they never found him. That poor family. I wish there had been some cameras there or what really happened. Train driver from Australia. For me it would be either an emu charging headfirst at my train, or 2 foxes fornicating in between the tracks. Emu hold grudges. They never forgot the war. A veteran who believes the war is still on. 15-year railroader here. I once saw a homeless guy getting a blowjob from a toothless addict next to the tracks in Nashville. Also one I didn't personally witness but used to be a common occurrence just north of Birmingham, Alabama was a lady who would stand next to the tracks in a trench coat with a photographer, and when the train was going by or right before, would get completely naked for a photo shoot. Another legend is the Chapel Hill ghost light in Chapel Hill, Tennessee. Supposedly, a long time ago a conductor got ran over by a train and decapitated. Now, after a train goes by, a mysterious light can be seen going down the tracks and even cross from side to side. Legend has it, it is the conductor looking for his head. I've never seen it since it is only after the train goes by that it comes out. My uncle swears that he saw it multiple times back in the 70s or 80s though. Edit. Linked a News 2 story on the light. How did you know she was toothless? Well, as went by kinda slow because of a speed restriction, she stopped, looked up at us and smiled. He then promptly grabbed the back of her head and guided it back down to complete the task at hand. My grandfather on my mother's side has an eerie story about this. He drove trains back in the early 70s to the late 80s. He mostly stayed around the southeast area where we live. One night while he was going through an intensely forested area he noticed that in the distance it looked really bright, like daytime. It was in the middle of the night, probably 3 AM. He describes it like he was seeing the end of a cave, so he keeps going on. He's not about to stop an entire train. He reaches the light about 2 minutes after he sees it, and it's simply daytime. He checks his clock and it still says 3 AM. He says there were clouds in the sky and everything. He goes past a nice barn and some farmland with cows and everything seems normal. He's blinking hard trying to figure it out, and then he goes back into some trees and it's night again. Never happened again. He did travel through that area again during the day and nothing seemed out of place other than the barn seeming a bit more weathered and there weren't any cows, but that could just be because it was a different barn. Old barns are common out here. He isn't a superstitious person. He's very skeptical about anything that's not science or religion, so this story has always stuck with me. Never explained. Probably a meteorite burning in. If the size and trajectory was right, they can be like a giant flare lighting everything up.